This one's on the OutSystems Way of Thinking. I know that a lot of the folks here have come from traditional development environments such as Java, C#, or maybe some of the newer ones that have become popular recently, like Python, Ruby, Node.js, and so on. When you come to OutSystems, a really common mistake is that people just try to take whatever tool they use to edit their code. Visual Studio, Eclipse, VS Code, Notepad, VI, whatever it is you use to edit your code, and they just try replacing that one piece of the process with Service Studio. Problem is that that doesn't work. OutSystems has a very opinionated approach to software development. Tools like Java, C#, they let us do whatever we want the way we want to do them. And they say, if you want to do things like this, you can. If you want to do things like that, you can. OutSystems narrows the choices a lot. And so what happens is somebody who comes from Java, C#, whatever, they come to OutSystems and they get frustrated, they get angry because they say, well, I want to do things like this, and OutSystems won't let me, and I'm going to be angry. That's what happens. And then they get frustrated. The reality is that the way OutSystems is designed, they say, we don't want to have you able to do anything possible. We have found one way to get the job done that works really well most of the time, and I want you to do things like that. So if you're used to doing things the way you feel like, OutSystems is frustrating. The more experienced you are as a developer, the worse this problem is. I've hired people who had like 15 years of software development experience, and they lasted like a week, and they said, I can't stand this. I've had people fresh out of college who had never developed professionally before in their life, and they thought OutSystems was amazing because they did not have pre-made ideas in their head about how software development happens. The worst is when people say, how do I do this one little thing that I'm used to always doing in OutSystems, instead of saying, how would OutSystems solve this problem for me? For example, I worked with a person, he had been used to PHP and MySQL, and all he wanted to do was make templates with little placeholders to fill stuff in. And I kept trying to explain to him, that's not the way OutSystems works. This isn't PHP. We don't make templates. And he kept trying to build template builders in OutSystems. And I kept telling him, this isn't the way it works. And it did not go very well. I've had people who are real C# experts, and they keep saying, why doesn't OutSystems have something like LINQ? Why doesn't OutSystems have something like LINQ? I say they do. It's called the database. If you need to know what's in the database, you run a query, and all the things that you do in LINQ, you can do in a database query. It says, but what if I need to do stuff with things in memory? I said, yeah, I get it. That's a concern in C#, but in OutSystems, we almost never work with stuff in memory that didn't come from a database. So this isn't really a big deal. He says, no, it is a big deal. I said, it's a big deal, we can prove to me. And this is the kind of stuff that people get frustrated by. So what we want to do is we want to learn the OutSystems way of approaching problems so that we're less frustrated and we can get our work done quicker with less pain, misery, and anger. So the OutSystems opinion on things. They follow what's called the 80-20 rule. Can somebody explain to me what the 80-20 rule is? 80-20 rule? All right, the 80-20 rule is that you can get 80% of the work done with 20% of the effort, exactly. Or that you cover 80% of your use cases with 20% of the code. You can flip it around and you can say 80% of the code is for 20% of your use cases. So what OutSystems' approach is they're going to cover 80% of your possible use cases as a developer, and it's going to be 20% of the effort of using C# or Java. They prefer readable and maintainable code over elegant, clever, efficient code. So things where a C# developer might write like 3 lines of LINQ, OutSystems is going to have you drag and drop some for eaches and ifs and a switch and an assign and a list dependent this and that. The reason is that a junior developer ends up making code that a senior developer would make. When I was a C# developer, I would look at the code that I would write, and I'd write clever, elegant, and efficient code. And then my junior developer would come after me. I'd tell him, we found a bug in this thing, can you fix it? And he would look at this code and say, I don't understand what this does. And then he would have to go and read a 400-page book about LINQ just to make sense of the 4 lines of LINQ code in my application. With OutSystems, the code that I write is almost identical to the code that a junior developer writes. Somebody with 1 week experience writes code exactly like somebody with 1 year or 10 years experience. The more experienced developer is faster, they produce less bugs. But the code itself is almost identical. The code quality is identical. And that's a huge advantage for us. It means I can take somebody who I just trained, have them edit the most difficult piece of the application, and I know they can understand it. It doesn't matter who wrote it. Many of the development features that we're used to are used to actually getting in the way of being a good developer. This is not always true, and you may see things differently. This is the OutSystems opinion on development. Some examples of those: object-oriented programming. How many times have you had an argument that lasted like 3 days over whether or not something should use the singleton pattern or do abstract factory classes versus concrete classes, right? These are the kinds of arguments that we get tied up in forever with object-oriented programming. OutSystems says there's no there's no more arguments. Code branching. Version control is something that we're all used to. OutSystems says no version control, no branching in our version control. And we say, why? I can explain why. Null values. People who do a lot of work with databases or who are used to doing certain tricks love null values. Me and my father, a little short story, my father, he's a software developer. He's been developing software since the 60s. I used to work for my father. I worked for him for like 5 years, and it was horrible. I'm not sure if I love my father anymore after that. He and I once had a 4-hour argument if a function call should return null or throw an exception in certain situations. Recursive structures. Recursive structures, for those who remember your Comp Sci 101 class, everybody has to do something recursive. They say, when in the real world will I ever use this? There's places in the real world we use, and OutSystems does support recursion, but does not support recursive structures because they just make things very difficult to understand. Complicated SQL. You can write complicated SQL in SQL. If you need to not, you just use the aggregates. The 2 things aggregates really need is they need a distinct and they need an in. Outside of that, if you got distinct and in aggregates, you eliminate probably all but 1% of your SQLs. Eval, reflection, callbacks, delegates, lambdas, closures, and so on. Depends on the language, depends on where you came from. We call these things different things. These things can do some really neat tricks. All those really neat tricks always get us into trouble. I used to be a Perl programmer. If anybody's programmed in Perl, we can have a good cry in the corner over it. Perl loves eval. Every time I wrote an eval in Perl, I regret it. Await, async, promises, things like that, OutSystems doesn't support them. It doesn't have asynchronous stuff other than BPT and timers. Again, these things can all be used to do some great work in languages like JavaScript and Java and C# and Python and so on. The problem is that in the OutSystems opinion, the benefits are good, but there's a lot of dangers that are much worse than the benefits. That's the OutSystems opinion. So let's get into some of these. SQL. Learn to use aggregates over SQL. One of the things I've heard a couple times this week from people talking to me is that there's concern over the efficiency of the SQL. OutSystems has a built-in optimizer. That built-in optimizer is extremely good. It will not select any fields that you're not actually using. That is right there more efficient than the SQL that you're doing, because if you're writing SQL to make it that efficient, you have to maintain a custom structure that matches exactly what you need to come out. And every time you change your screen, you'd have to adjust that structure. And every time you would change something, you'd have to adjust the select to match it, all to get the exact same results that the OutSystems optimizer gives you without even thinking about it. There are some times where you need to use a SQL over an aggregate. Those cases are very limited. If you find yourself using SQL often, it's a red flag that either you're not thinking like OutSystems wants you to think, or it's a sign that your data model is no good, especially if you have complex SQL. I looked at some code a couple weeks ago from one of our clients, or potential client. It was filled with some gigantic and complicated, difficult SQL. I copy and pasted the SQL out into a text editor and saved that file. 10 kilobytes of SQL for one statement. 10 kilobytes of SQL for one statement. I want you to think about how difficult that is for the SQL server to parse that, to execute that. What's the performance of that going to be like? Why? Because their data model did not meet the needs of the application. When you have a lot of complicated SQL, like if I see you using case and when in your SQL, subquery after subquery after subquery, stuff like that, that's the signs that your data model needs to be fixed. The solution is not to hit that nail with a bunch of SQL. The solution is to pull the nail out and replace your data model. Extensions. Ask yourself, is this extension really needed? For a long time, most of the extensions I wrote were to do REST service calls because OutSystems did not have built-in REST service calls. Now it does. There should be very little need to write extensions. Most of the things that you need to integrate with, 10 years ago when I learned OutSystems, most of the things I need to integrate with, they didn't have a web service. They would give me a DLL and they would say, here, use this DLL, it's got my API. Nowadays, everything's got a REST service or a SOAP service, heaven forbid. There's no need to write most of those extensions. So if you find yourself going into an extension, there's a good chance that you're writing C# code because that's what you're comfortable with, and that there's really a better way of doing this. The big problem with extensions is that they're difficult to maintain and troubleshoot. Debugging in them, good luck. There is a way to debug extensions. You have to be an on-prem installation. You have to have access to the server. You have to be able to tweak some things in IIS. I've never figured out how to debug extensions and make that work. I read the instructions, my eyes glazed over, and I said there's got to be a better way. A lot of times, if you find yourself doing a lot of work in extensions and there's no way around it, you may want to consider doing that work as a completely separate web service that's maintained separately in C# or JavaScript or whatever, and then calling that from your OutSystems application. JavaScript. JavaScript, a lot of times we write that. It turns out that a lot of times if we're writing JavaScript, it's not because our JavaScript's bad, it's because we don't understand all of the widgets and libraries available to us already. There's a ton of things that we're doing in JavaScript that OutSystems has already done for us in the OutSystems UI Web, or if you're on version 10, Silk UI. In those components, they've already got a ton of things already built in JavaScript. Most of the time when I'm writing JavaScript, it's very small stuff. It's things like, I want to save automatically when somebody does something, like I want to have a hidden save field, right? Stuff like that. Or I want to, when somebody tabs into a field, I want it to automatically look something up. You can do these things. Just be aware that the more JavaScript you're writing, it means that what's probably happening is that you don't know the OutSystems libraries that well yet. Take a look at them, learn them well, so that you can make sure you're not writing code when the code's already been written for you. Be careful using widget click. What happens is that sometime in our first project or two, we ask somebody, we say, I want to do something where in my action, something else happens on the screen. They teach us about the widget click action. And you say, oh, wow, that solves a lot of problems for me, doesn't it? It does. It has a really lousy user experience because what's happening is it's got a little bit of a delay, the user sees multiple postbacks, they've clicked a button, the screen refreshed and they thought they could start working, and then all of a sudden something else happens as if they clicked the button again, but they didn't click the button. It's really confusing for the user. Instead, they have an event system built into OutSystems 11 now. This is new. And, well, it was also in the version 10 mobile side. The event system does a lot of the things that people have been using widget click for the last 15 years. Check out events, learn them, understand them. It's a little bit of extra complexity, but it eliminates a lot of the pain that people have with widget click. A lot of the existing JavaScript widget libraries out there, they're not designed for use with OutSystems, right? They're just these separate things. They have their own stuff going on. They may not share the same look and feel. They may not share the same CSS styles as the rest of OutSystems. If you can, always prefer to use something from OutSystems UI Web or OutSystems UI Mobile, Silk UI, whichever one you're using. Always prefer those over a third party like Kendo UI or whatever. Kendo UI is great. Let's not use the one thing, let's not use like a Kendo UI calendar and then mix it with the rest of the OutSystems stuff and have it look totally different. HTML. Writing HTML manually is a big red flag. I've had to write, in the last 10 years, I've had to write an HTML tag about 10 times. It is extraordinarily rare. I think like one of one of those horizontal rules, right? You should not be writing HTML. You should not. You should not. There's other ways to get there. If you need an ordered list or an unordered list, use list records. You can change it says record separator. You can set record separator to be bullets or numbers. That will give you an OL or a UL. You don't need to be writing HTML manually. If you are, especially if you do it for like more than like once a year, you've got to readjust how you think about writing this software. You're not learning the system. You probably just need CSS. Almost everything that people are doing with HTML, I look at it and say, you can do this with CSS, you just have to learn CSS better. And that's not a criticism, I'm not saying that you're dumb. I'm just saying you don't know everything. And so what happens when we don't know everything, everything that we see, everything that's a challenge, we view it through the lens of, this is what I know. It's like I've got a pair of glasses, this is what I know. HTML and JavaScript. Like this. Everything I see looks like HTML and JavaScript to me because these are my glasses. So what I need to do is I need to get a new pair of glasses, and this pair might be OutSystems UI, and this pair might be rich widgets. And now I see everything through OutSystems UI and rich widgets, and now I can work like OutSystems does. It's just a question of getting a new pair of glasses. It doesn't mean you're bad, it just means this is what you're used to. Also, it helps to set customer expectations and your estimates. A lot of times you get a customer, they've got their own design team and they whip something up together in Sketch or InVision or whatever, and those tools expect to just export it and then just import it into Node or Python or whatever they're using, and in like 5 seconds they got all this HTML and CSS magically put together. And that works really well for those environments. It doesn't work well for us. We have to put into our estimates and our workflow the time and effort to take those things and recreate them and import them into our OutSystems theme. And we also have to have the customer understand that, we're not using Bootstrap, we're not using this, we're not using whatever. Like, I don't even know the names of this stuff because it changes every week. We're not using their framework, we're not using that. We're going to make it look as close as we can, but don't expect it to work exactly the same because we're not using it. And you may need to make some significant changes to their CSS. Hopefully you can just take their CSS, paste it into our classes, but you may need to make some other changes as well. It's just a fact. OutSystems comes with a pile of CSS. Version control. The way OutSystems wants you to think about version control, they want you to not do branching, they want you to use a feature flag. Can anyone tell me what a feature flag is? Okay. A feature flag is a condition inside our code that will look towards some sort of configuration and determine what to do. So it could say, if I'm currently in a development environment, let me show this new feature I'm working on. Otherwise, let me show the code the way it was before. It might say, if the user has signed up for the beta program, let me show this code that's currently in beta. Otherwise, let me show the usual code. It might be an A/B test. Does anyone know what A/B testing is? Companies like Google love A/B testing. The idea is that you have group A and group B, and you show them totally different things, and then you measure how they do. So in A/B testing, we might say 10% of our users see the new code randomly. And then we measure how many bugs they get, or how many errors, or how many nasty emails they write saying your application stinks and I got lots of problems, right? So OutSystems tells us use feature flags. So if you're writing a big piece of code that's going to cover more than one sprint, and I know that we try to not write code that covers more than one sprint, The reality is that sometimes we write code that covers more than one sprint. Jim, close your ears. Close your ears, Jim. I know, Mon, close your ears. I'm not saying this, but sometimes we write code that covers more than one sprint. For example, if you're doing 2-week sprints and you're writing a brand new invoicing system, that might take 3 sprints. So you have to have, in development, a flag that says, if somebody wants to view invoicing, if I'm in development, I go to the new invoicing system, because otherwise I can't test my invoice code. Otherwise, if I'm not in development, go show them the current invoicing system, because my invoicing system is going to cover 3 sprints. So feature flags. I always have a standard configuration item that says development environment, because this is the most common feature flag I use. You might have flags for A/B testing, beta testing, and so on. Use what works for you. But again, we're setting feature flags. Finally, you need to understand the compilation process. In the next couple weeks, I've promised myself I'll put up an article on Medium that explains the compile process in depth. The reason why this is important is because sometimes people think that there's ways to not have new code end up in production. There are some situations where you can be working on new code and some of the application will not use that new code. I will tell you that based on a question I recently handled with somebody outside this organization, I will tell you that simply not refreshing references will not make that happen. That's how this conversation got started. So in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to write a very in-depth article on Medium explaining exactly how compile process works and how that affects the code that we're writing. That will help you to understand version control and feature flags and so on. So please keep an eye out for that. The meta model, that's the system that OutSystems uses under the hood. We talked about this Tuesday night, about the data model and how it explained, the data model has a data model to tell you how the data model works. Sometimes we need to write code using the data model where we inspect the data model. We're almost always doing something like a dynamic query. Do not overuse it because it creates complicated, nasty code that's difficult to maintain, difficult to debug, difficult to troubleshoot. This is a form of reflection. Reflection is very difficult to troubleshoot. If you find yourself doing this, you probably just need view for entity. Install view for entity, work to get it running, to get your views set up, and then then import those views as an external entity using Integration Studio and write code against that. That's probably what you need to do if you find yourself using that meta model a whole bunch. And that's it.